In the age of constant noise, where every second is filled with chatter, commentary, and opinions flooding our senses, silence feels unnatural. We reach for our phones when the room grows still. We fill the air with meaningless words just to avoid the discomfort of quiet. Yet Nietzsche believed that in this very silence lies our greatest source of strength. The modern world teaches us to fear silence, to mistake it for emptiness. But Nietzsche saw silence not as absence, but as presence, a space so powerful that only the strong can endure it. The question is, why? Why would a philosopher obsessed with power, with a will to overcome, glorify something as simple as silence? Because for Nietzsche, silence was never passive. It was active. It was a weapon, a refusal to let the world dictate your thoughts, a rebellion against noise. Silence was the soil where strength took root, where ideas sharpened, where the spirit prepared for battle. This is the paradox we uncover today. Silence as strength, silence as resistance, silence as the unseen foundation of power. And perhaps more importantly, what it means for us, trapped in a world where silence has become almost impossible. Nietzsche lived in a century where voices clashed violently: politics, morality, religion, science. Everyone was talking, debating, shouting their truths into the void. But Nietzsche looked deeper. He saw that when a truth is spoken too early, too carelessly, without first being tested in silence, it rots. It becomes poisonous. This is why he withdrew, why his writings often feel like they were forged in solitude. He knew that words are cheap when they are not born out of silence. Think of the way a sword must be tempered in fire, hammered, cooled, and forged before it can cut cleanly. Silence was that fire. The philosopher's silence was not empty, it was a discipline. And in this, Nietzsche's philosophy collides with psychology. Because silence is not just a philosophical act, it is a psychological one. The mind that can sit with silence is a mind that is not enslaved by compulsions. The person who can remain silent in a world that demands reaction is already stronger than most. Silence and solitude were Nietzsche's crucible, and if we are honest, they terrify us. To sit alone, in silence, is to come face to face with ourselves. And few people want that confrontation. Most drown themselves in noise, endless scrolling, shallow conversations, constant distraction, because silence exposes the truth of their inner emptiness. Nietzsche saw this weakness everywhere. He wrote that people talk too much not because they have something to say, but because they are afraid of what silence might reveal. And here lies his radical insight. Those who master silence master themselves. They do not need to prove themselves through words. They do not need validation from noise. Their silence becomes heavier than another's speech. It becomes an aura of power. Psychologically, we recognize this today. Silence unsettles people. In a conversation, the one who holds silence controls the room. In an argument, the one who refuses to be baited by words wins. In life, the one who can endure silence holds a strength that noise can never touch. Nietzsche's philosophy on silence is not about withdrawal from life, but preparation for it. He saw silence as the sharpening stone of the spirit. To be silent is not to be weak, it is to gather strength, to transform, to endure the unbearable until the moment comes to speak or act with devastating clarity. Because silence gives weight. Words born from silence carry the force of necessity. They are not random noises in a crowded room, they are arrows. And when they strike, they pierce. This is what Nietzsche meant by strength in silence. to soar above the noise, to resist the pull of chatter, to cultivate an inner power that does not need constant display. The art of silence is the art of restraint. It is the art of waiting until your strength is undeniable. It is the art of choosing not to speak, not because you have nothing to say, but because your silence is already louder than words. And so, we begin where Nietzsche always begins, with the strength to endure what others cannot. The strength to stand alone. The strength to be silent. If silence was strength for Nietzsche, it was also resistance. To fall silent in a world that demands your voice, your reaction, your submission, is to say no without speaking. Think about it. The world thrives on noise. Empires, institutions, and even modern corporations depend on distraction. They need your eyes, your attention, your constant participation in the endless chorus. To withdraw into silence is to disrupt the system. It is to declare independence not with words, but with absence. Nietzsche believed that silence is a form of rebellion against conformity. The silent man does not dance to the rhythms of the crowd. He does not echo the opinions of the majority. His silence is heavier than the slogans of the masses. It is a refusal to be consumed by the herd. Psychologically, this aligns with what we know about social conformity. People fear silence because silence interrupts the flow of collective thought. In a group, if everyone is speaking and one person refuses to respond, their silence becomes a mirror. It forces others to confront their own words. It creates unease. This is why those who remain silent often seem intimidating. They withhold something the group expects. Silence is not empty, it is charged. It is the absence that reshapes the presence of everyone around it. Nietzsche understood this instinctively. He saw silence as the mark of those who rise above herd morality. The strong do not need to announce their strength. Their refusal to join the chorus already sets them apart. Even outside Nietzsche, the greatest thinkers recognized silence as an ally. Confucius knew it. The Stoics knew it. Jung, centuries later, would describe how withdrawing from constant noise is essential for individuation, the process of becoming oneself. But Nietzsche's silence is not gentle. It is not the monk's silence of passive retreat. It is the silence of resistance, of sharpening, of holding one's strength in reserve until the right moment. Imagine a predator in stillness, waiting. Its silence is not weakness. Its silence is strategy. Nietzsche saw human strength in the same way. Those who cannot hold silence act too quickly, speak too soon, spend their energy recklessly. But those who master silence conserve themselves for decisive moments. In psychology, we might call this delayed gratification, the ability to resist immediate reward for something greater later. But Nietzsche would say it goes beyond mere patience. It is the very essence of strength, the will to endure absence, the will to resist the hunger for recognition, the will to remain silent until discovery becomes inevitable. Today, in a world addicted to instant expression, where every thought must be posted, every silence must be filled, every moment shared, Nietzsche's philosophy cuts deeper than ever. To embrace silence now is to refuse the world's addiction. It is to reclaim power from the economy of attention. When you choose silence, you terrify those who cannot bear it. When you refuse to fill the air with noise, you remind others of their dependence on it. Silence reveals weakness in others even as it strengthens you. This is why Nietzsche's silence was not retreat, but resistance. It was his way of preserving himself in a world that sought to consume him. His silence was a weapon sharper than speech. And so, when we consider silence not as emptiness but as defiance, we see Nietzsche's deeper message, that strength is not in what you say, but in what you can withhold. That power is not in expression, but in the mastery of restraint. For Nietzsche, the art of silence is the art of resistance. The refusal to be moved by the world. The refusal to dissipate strength in noise. The refusal to give the herd what it demands. And it is in that refusal that a man becomes unbreakable. Silence, for Nietzsche, was resistance, a refusal to be consumed by the herd. But for Carl Jung, silence was not only defiance, it was transformation. If Nietzsche's silence was the sharpening stone, Jung's silence was the womb. To Jung, silence was essential for individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. Because in silence, the masks fall away. The voices of the world grow dim. And what is left is not emptiness, but the faint whisper of the self. Most people never hear it. They drown it in distraction. They run from it, fearing the truth of their own depths. But Jung insisted, only in silence can we descend into the unconscious and discover the patterns, the shadows, the forgotten fragments of the soul. Nietzsche and Jung, though separated by time, converge here. For both, silence is the proving ground of strength. For Nietzsche, it is strength against the world. For Jung, it is strength against oneself. This is the dual challenge of silence, to endure solitude not only against the noise of others, but against the noise within. Because when the world falls silent, we are forced to hear the voices we have buried, the griefs we have not faced, the shadows we have avoided. And here lies the danger. Silence can destroy those who cannot face themselves. It is not a comfortable place. Nietzsche himself warned that silence without strength poisons the spirit. Jung knew the same truth. Silence without courage can lead to despair, madness, or self-deception. Silence demands that we look inside. And in looking, we awaken to what has always been there. Our desires, our fears, our shadows. Psychologically, this process is terrifying because the unconscious does not speak in polite sentences. It speaks in symbols, in images, in the language of dreams. In silence, these symbols emerge. They unsettle us. They challenge the fragile stories we tell ourselves. But if we endure them, if we stay silent long enough, something remarkable happens. Transformation begins. Jung described individuation as becoming whole, uniting the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the mask and the true self. This alchemy begins in silence. This is why silence is not just resistance. It is creation. It is the space where the raw material of life transforms into something higher. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the higher man, is not forged in the noise of conformity, but in the crucible of silence. Jung's individuated self emerges in the same way, through the courage to sit in solitude, to face the unconscious, to endure the darkness until new light emerges. Silence is where we confront the darkness. It strips away the distractions that keep us from ourselves. And in that confrontation, strength is born. Nietzsche's silence was a weapon, but Jung's silence was medicine. Both required courage. Both required strength. But together they show us the full spectrum of silence. Resistance outward, transformation inward. Think about your own life. How often do you fill silence with noise, not because you want to, but because you are afraid? How often do you escape into sound to avoid facing yourself? Nietzsche would call this weakness. Jung would call it avoidance of individuation. Both would agree, the one who cannot face silence cannot face life. In a world of noise, the art of silence becomes rare. But if we follow Nietzsche and Jung, we see that silence is not absence, it is presence. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not weakness, but strength. Silence is where the soul is tested. Silence is where the mask cracks. Silence is where transformation begins. And so, the art of silence is not just about resisting the world. It is about becoming something the world cannot break. It is about turning inward, facing the darkness, and emerging stronger, clearer, freer. This is the silence that heals. The silence that transforms. The silence that awakens. Silence does not only transform the individual, it transforms every relationship. Between lovers, between friends, between rivals. Silence becomes a force that reshapes the invisible balance of power. Nietzsche understood that speech is cheap. Words are abundant, scattered, often meaningless. But silence is rare. And what is rare is powerful. Consider the weight of silence in conversation. The one who fills every gap reveals their weakness, their need to be heard, their fear of emptiness. But the one who can hold silence commands the room. Their restraint unsettles others. Their quiet confidence demands attention. Silence, then, is not withdrawal, it is control. It is the refusal to give away power too easily. Psychologists know this instinctively. In negotiation, silence is one of the most powerful tools. The one who remains silent forces the other to reveal more, to grow uncomfortable, to make mistakes. In relationships, silence can create longing, attraction, even obsession. Because silence creates space, and in that space, imagination does the work words cannot. Jung would have seen this as archetypal. Silence invokes the unknown, and the unknown always carries fascination. The lover who withdraws becomes mysterious. The friend who falls quiet seems distant, more desirable. The rival who refuses to respond becomes intimidating. Silence shifts the balance. It draws others into its orbit. It makes them work harder for your presence, your attention, your approval. There is truth here too. Silence can wound more deeply than words. A cutting remark may sting, but it is over quickly. Silence, however, lingers. It suggests judgment without resolution. It forces the other to question themselves, to fill the void with their own insecurities. Nietzsche would say that silence reveals strength precisely because it shows mastery over impulse. Anyone can react. Few can remain silent. Silence is a refusal to be moved, a refusal to dissipate one's energy on the unworthy. This is why the silent man or woman often radiates an aura of power. They appear unshaken, untouchable above the noise. And in human relationships, that aura is irresistible. But there is danger here too. Silence can heal, but it can also manipulate. It can create intimacy, but it can also punish. To withhold speech is to withhold connection. And when silence is used not from strength but from spite, it poisons relationships rather than transforming them. Jung warned of this shadow side. What appears as strength may in fact be avoidance. What appears as wisdom may in fact be fear. Silence must be chosen consciously, not as an escape, but as a deliberate act of power or reflection. Otherwise, it becomes destructive to others and to the self. When rooted in strength, silence does not betray. It reveals. It shows us who clings to us out of fear of absence, who respects us enough to endure our stillness, who grows stronger when met with our restraint. Silence purifies relationships. It strips away the unnecessary. It exposes the weak bonds that depend on constant words. It strengthens the connections that survive without noise. Nietzsche would see this as a kind of natural selection of relationships. Only the strongest endure silence. Only the deepest thrive in it. Only those who can face the abyss of another's silence without breaking truly belong in our lives. This is why silence is not just personal strength, but social power. In love, it creates longing. In conflict, it commands respect. In friendship, it reveals truth. The art of silence in relationships is not about manipulation. It is about clarity. It is about refusing to waste words when silence speaks louder. It is about knowing that presence is not measured in noise, but in weight. Because when you master silence, your very absence becomes presence. Your quiet becomes louder than words. And others, whether they admit it or not, will feel it. Silence, in Nietzsche's thought, is never an accident. It is not mere muteness, nor a passive retreat from life. It is a weapon, a shield, a temple, a strategy of becoming untouchable in a world that constantly demands your voice, your opinion, your reaction. Nietzsche suffered more than most could endure. His body was frail, tormented by headaches, blindness, and isolation. Yet he chose silence again and again, withdrawing into solitude to cultivate his philosophy. He endured exile from friends, betrayal by Wagner, and the indifference of his society. But it was in silence, in the quiet mountains of Switzerland, in the solitude of Italian towns, that he birthed his greatest works. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Beyond good and evil, the gay science. His silence was not absence. It was creation, a furnace hidden from the noise of the world, where his suffering was melted down and reforged into strength. What Nietzsche teaches us is simple, yet almost unbearable in its demand. If you want to endure, you must learn to be silent. Not every pain requires a complaint. Not every injustice requires an outcry. Some must be carried, burned inwardly until they transmute into wisdom. And so, the silent ones often appear strange, distant, even cold. But it is not detachment. It is power ripening in the shadows, waiting for its decisive moment. There is a silence of survival, and then there is the silence of becoming. This second silence is the soil from which greatness grows. The modern mind is addicted to interruption. Our thoughts are hijacked by devices, our attention shattered by the endless clamor of digital noise. We do not think. We react. We do not create. We consume. But Nietzsche whispers across time, withdraw. Enter the quiet. Close the gates of your availability. Silence the stream of voices demanding your energy. Because only in that depth of silence can you begin to hear the faint music of your own becoming. The silence of becoming is not empty. It is full. Full of potential, of unspoken visions, of ideas gestating in the dark. It is the chrysalis from which the butterfly emerges. And this silence demands trust. Trust that you do not need to prove yourself constantly. Trust that the slow work of silence, invisible to others, will one day erupt into something undeniable. Nietzsche also understood the silence that waits at the end. Death. the silence into which all voices eventually dissolve. We fear it, yet we cannot escape it. For Nietzsche, the task was not to deny this final silence, but to embrace it. To live in such a way that, when that silence came, it would not be a theft, but a completion. The silence of death is not our enemy. It is the canvas upon which the meaning of our lives is finally drawn. And if we have lived loudly, frantically, always in the noise of others, then our death will swallow us as if we had never spoken at all. But if we have lived in silence, cultivating strength, building depth, forging clarity, then our death is but the closing of a book whose pages still echo long after it is shut. Nietzsche's silence was tragic. In his final years, madness consumed him, and he fell into literal silence, unable to speak his own words. Yet even then, his philosophy had already transcended him. His silence became the silence of immortality. His words still thunder, carried across centuries, while the noisy voices of his time have long been forgotten. Nietzsche's philosophy of silence is not a call to escape life, but to face it with greater intensity. To withdraw, so you may return stronger. To remain silent, so that when you do speak, your words shake the world. The age we live in fears silence, because silence is uncontrollable. It cannot be monetized, cannot be manipulated, cannot be consumed. That is why it is your greatest rebellion. And so, when the world clamors for your constant voice, remember Nietzsche. Remember that silence is not emptiness. It is strength, endurance, and the birthplace of your becoming. If this reflection on Nietzsche's philosophy has stirred something in you, then you already sense the power of silence in your own life. My friend, let this be your invitation to not just listen, but to live differently. To step out of the noise and into your own depth. If you want to keep walking this path with me, then I invite you to subscribe. Together, we'll dive deeper into the wisdom of the greatest thinkers and uncover how their lessons can transform the chaos of modern life. Silence is strength. Depth is freedom. And your journey has only just begun.